Hi, and welcome to Film Fam, inspired by true events. I'm Heather, married to Brian, mother to Zoe.
Hi, I'm Brian, married to Heather, father to Zoe.
Hi, I'm Zoe, daughter to those people.
We're the Grays, and we're your Film Fam.
Those people? Okay, so that's your mother, Heather. I'm your father, Brian.
Yeah, those guys. Them again. My folks. My old men and women.
Yeah, we're folks.
We
I'm
are
okay
the
with that.
folks.
And this is Film Fam, inspired by true events.
Yeah, it is. Thank
I didn't
you.
know if anyone said it.
Yeah.
I
your
mean,
mom
I said
that.
it in the beginning, but thank you,
Just
Zoe.
to reiterate.
Let's reiterate it.
Okay, so to sum up, this is Film Fam, inspired by true events. I'm Brian, married to Heather, father to Zoe.
Today, we are talking about the 1922 silent film Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau. It stars Max Schreck as Count Orlok.
Get out of my swamp. Sorry. The face you just gave me. I could tell you thought I was going to make a much funnier joke than that. You thought I was going to make a joke about Shadow of the Vampire, where in that movie, Max Schreck is actually a vampire. You thought I was
Yes.
going to go there, but I
Wait
went
a
to
minute.
Shrek.
Did Christopher Walken once play a character named Max Schreck on something?
You could.
You're the
I don't
the person who knows everything, Zoe.
About Christopher Walken?
No, about the behind the scenes type stuff. This sounds like a behind the scenes type stuff.
I don't think
I did
so.
know behind the scenes facts about this movie because I did a bunch of other stuff.
Okay,
about
well,
it.
I guess I'll tell them.
So
Oh, boy.
you're not gonna know, and it was made in the 1920s. I don't think there was a behind the scene. They didn't have enough money to do anything behind.
There was just the
scene.
front of the scene.
It was just the scene.
Yeah, just the front scene.
If you want to know what happened behind the scene, go
Yes.
watch Shadow of a Vampire.
Okay, I looked it up. In
Ooh.
Batman Returns, Christopher Walken plays a bad guy named Max Schreck.
Wow,
What?
that feels kind of rude to
Actually
actual
called
actor
Max
Schreck.
Schreck?
Yeah. So what did he do? He was a powerful sociopathic and ruthless business mogul who
was
serves
just
as
an actor.
the boss of Catwoman, of Selena Kyle. He's the one that pushes her out the window.
Yeah, but
and he
how
turns her
did
into
they
Catwoman.
spell
Oh,
Shrek?
I love that.
They spell
movie.
it S-H-R-E-C-K.
This one has a C for sure.
S-C-H-R-E-C-K.
Okay, so they get rid of one of the
And just
C's.
so we're clear, Shrek from movies such as Shrek has neither a
And-
C
and
nor the other
And
C.
Shrek too.
Neither the C nor the other C.
So, the true events that inspired this 1922 vampire film are pretty wild. So, we are going to have a wild talk tonight. It's night here.
It's night, and
Oh, yeah.
I hope you're listening to this at night, because then it's the spookiest time of the day.
Well, I mean, it's
That's our
quarter-
shirt. That's the shirt.
Night.
Night.
It's
The,
the
spookiest
spookiest
time of the day. For those of you who don't know, Nosferatu is basically the movie Dracula, but they didn't want to get sued by Bram Stoker's wife, Florence, so they changed things up a bit. Not enough though, because they did get sued, but they changed it up. It's in Germany instead of England. They collapsed some characters or combined them into one. They changed the names and stuff,
But mostly it's the exact plot.
if you're
If you
familiar
read Dracula,
or watched any of the movies,
right?
it's like a real estate agent gets sent to Transylvania to talk to a vampire that he doesn't know is a vampire because the vampire wants to buy some real estate. In Dracula, it's in London or England, and in Nosferatu, it's in some town in Germany. And then they have to defeat the vampire. That's the basic. But the thing that makes it so obvious that it's a ripoff is that it's about a real estate agent.
Just the whole plot.
Yeah, the whole plot. So Nosferatu was produced in 1922 by Prana Films. That's the production company. Again, this is in the silent era. It was a German studio created by occultist and artist Albin Grau.
Ooh.
I know, that's right. The studio was named after the Buddhist concept prana, which is Sanskrit for life force or vital principle. And this kind of brings us back to our Moana episode in the concept of mana. because it's the same kind of thing. It's prana. And the primary goal of Prana Films was to produce occult and supernatural films. And Nosferatu was going to be their first film, ended up being their only film.
So it was their first.
It was their first and their only because they were sued by Florence Stoker for ripping off Dracula. And that lawsuit not only bankrupted Prana Studios, so they couldn't make any more, but the lawsuit also stipulated that all the copies of Nosferatu be burned. She wanted them to be burned so that like they couldn't make money off of it and they couldn't seem like they created something that was really a ripoff of her husband's material. But they did not all get burned, thankfully. Some survived, and Nosferatu is now considered a classic of German expressionist cinema, a classic horror film, and actually essential to the mythology of vampires that we know today. In our third episode of Frankenstein, we talked about the vampire written by Dr. John Polidori.
Yeah.
Zoe, do you want to describe what vampire tropes Polidori was inventing or laying down? Do you know about any of that?
I mean, because he kind of translated the vampire as like a more almost romantic figure, not as in he has romance within the story, but kind of the ideals of the Romantic period, because that's when Polidori was writing and sort of based him on Byron. So this kind of dark-haired, devilish. I mean, in the actual book of Dracula, he has white hair, but it's the same kind of like, I'm a refined gentleman who is a monster,
right.
Instead
romantic,
of who could possibly seem like he might do real estate things, instead of like, I am a actual monster out in the forest, like a werewolf or something.
Right, like, or even like Frankenstein's monster, he wouldn't like be buying real estate.
Right.
Like most monsters don't, like the mummy doesn't buy real estate.
A genteel vampire monster who is kind of a little tortured, that whole thing.
Right.
Now I want to see a movie with a mummy buying real estate.
And I will say it actually is kind of romantic / erotic, the ways in, because it is kind of like, I'm going to prey upon beautiful young women.
It is. It's a more sexual vampire rather than being a monster.
I'm just going to like come into your village at night and eat everyone. Yeah.
Bram Stoker, he worked from those stories, the more urbane, aristocratic, sexy vampire. And we do see a lot of stories where that's the kind of vampire, that's the vampire character. But Nosferatu, which the story is actually going back to the old folklore, like the Slavic monster. And all the movies that you've seen, if you've seen vampire movies or other media, comics, whatever, with like a bald vampire who's really animalistic, not sexy aristocrat, but like a freaky monster like 30 Days of Night or The Master and Buffy.
I was going to say.
Or Salem's Lot, or like that old vampire Peter in What We Do in Shadows, the old one. Like that vampire comes from Nosferatu. Count Orlok is where they're drawing from. And Count Orlok was also the first vampire to be killed by sunlight.
Okay.
They made that up.
They created that.
Yeah. That kind of vampire was coming from the Nosferatu line.
I want to give a shout out to, not necessarily like, it's hard to say that something's a better movie when it's like a direct remake homage, but the remake of Nosferatu by, who I'm talking
Werner
about,
Herzog.
by Werner Herzog is incredible.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It 100% captures the feeling of the original, but just with like updated, like it's in color and it's, it's not silent but it uses everything that it has, I think, to really, really make a good installation in the genre. So I would recommend
both of them.
Right. If you liked this, it's not just the same movie, but it is really, really, worth seeing.
I think it's very visceral. So like where the Murnau 1922 Nosferatu is
almost
in that
like a fairy tale.
Yeah, that like German expressionist, like everything's kind of distorted and exaggerated to get into. I'll talk a little bit about German expressionism, but the Werner Herzog one is like the dirt and the rats and the food, like everything is so textured in there.
You would expect a remake in modern day with our technology to lean into everything that the original didn't do or couldn't do, with the realism, the viscerality, and then probably, I haven't seen it, but you would expect a more frenetic pace. You would expect maybe less contrast in the light versus dark. Doing a lot of the things that they didn't do in the original to separate it.
You didn't see it?
No.
Oh, maybe we watched it alone. I like most of the things we watched
I know.
together.
I'm surprised.
That's a rip, but no, it wasn't like just trying to appeal to contemporary audiences in some kind of mainstream way. I think it was really digging into its own artistic direction of the time that was still avant-garde.
Yeah, because it's Werner Herzog. So it wasn't frenetic.
Era.
It was because he's, like
a very creeping pace.
He's a more independent filmmaker. But
it's not like if Rob Zombie does his take on something.
So I want to talk about German Expressionism a little bit. So Dracula, the book, published in 1897. Nosferatu comes out 25 years later, 1922. It's so weird to me that it's only 25 years later. 25 years ago for us, like Veronica Mars came out?
Wow.
That's the difference, it's really not that long ago. And it was German Expressionism was a movement in all medias of art at the time, but it didn't last for very long because Germany was kind of isolated after World War I. And then it kind of went away with the rise of Nazis. They didn't really like it. So I'll try to explain.
What did they like? Oh, wait, I know specifically.
Cabarets? Jews? Oh, no.
No, they didn't like those.
Did they like the gays? No. Okay. They didn't
like
anything
say that
good.
because we're Jewish and gay.
Yeah, they didn't like anything good.
Cabaret people.
So German Expressionists wanted to use unrealistic and distorted sets, lighting, and makeup to expose, with the sets and lighting and makeup, to expose the inner psychology of what was happening. Like Tim Burton.
Okay.
Tim Burton uses a lot of German Expressionists. He's clearly influenced by them. So it's like trying to make the world look like the psychology in the movie, rather than just it's like we're in New York and then the psychology is this. And I think a lot of filmmakers use that, but German Expressionism is very, very distorted in that. So they'll have doors that are off kilter and shadows that are like, 10 stories high and things that, and like so much eye makeup, they're really, really going for it. And,
goth.
Right. Well, yeah. And it's very artistic, can be very creepy. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a really good example of German Expressionist style. And people who were influenced were Hitchcock, Werner Herzog, Ridley Scott, and Tim Burton. Those are like popular directors who kind of do things somewhat in a German Expressionist or use tools from German Expressionism. So it makes sense to me that Prana Films would want to use German Expressionist style Nosferatu because Albin Grau, again, the occultist producer, who was also the artistic director of the film, and he was trying to use the symbolism of the vampire to bring occult ideas to a wider audience. And I find this so interesting, and I hope I can explain to you guys, because I haven't explained it to you yet, been holding back for the podcast, how Nosferatu and Dracula are considered occult, like foundational occult movies and books. Today we see vampires as like a supernatural creature, but not necessarily an occult figure. Mm-hmm. But the occult is, for those of you who, I will just define it a little bit, it's like magic or black magic or white magic or tarot cards, astrology, alchemy, spiritualism, which we talked about in our Ghostbusters episode. Those things are considered occult or the occult. A belief in the occult is like a belief that there's more in the world than you can easily see or know, and that there is a secret or lost knowledge or practices that can connect people to greater things or dark and terrible things or some kind of powers, right? It's like there's a secret other world that's happening.
Right.
And occultists are trying to figure out how they can tap into that secret other lost practices, secret knowledge.
All right. So is it fair to say that the occult is supernatural stuff that is not covered by a major religion?
Yes. They not science or religion, but they might attach themselves to religion, say, and this,
Okay.
or science, but also this. They don't eschew science and religion, but they would say more. They would want to say but actually, so for example,
I guess
Kabbalah.
Satanism would be
Right.
a cult, but
Right.
that clearly comes from Christianity. So
Right.
it's not just
Right.
separate from Christianity.
But so the Jewish, Kabbalah, I think it's Kabbalah. It's kind of like we're going to see a code in these words.
Right.
And it tells us something different. That's a cult. Or mysticism. And occult and mysticism are very interchangeable. Another example, Ghostbusters, the cards that are using to test for the ESP, the idea that people could have ESP powers and there's a way to figure it out and how to use it, that's an occult idea. It's like, oh, there's extra special stuff in the world, maybe good, maybe bad, and we're going to try to figure out how to access it.
Right, with science.
Right, but not real science, pseudoscience. And then the idea that there are ghosts is a cult. In Ghostbusters, again, all the books that Ray from Ghostbusters is conferring with about the ghosts, those are a cult. And the building, the idea that someone would build a whole building to open a dimension or whatever he's doing, that's an occult idea.
Right.
Because it's like, oh, I can do stuff with architecture to create a thing. That's a cult.
I mean, the girders had cores of pure selenium.
Right. So it's like, oh, if there's a secret weird way I built my building because it does. So it's all this extra special knowledge that most people don't have, and it can do extra special, powerful things. Okay. So that's, and I guess you kind of get it, but I'm just going to say a little bit more. Indiana Jones also has occult themes. Indy doesn't believe in it. He thinks it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo, or is that Star Wars?
That's related to a religion because that's supposed to be the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
I guess maybe the second movie is more.
No, even the first movie, because the Ark of the Covenant isn't supposed to, the idea that an ancient religious powerful artifact can be used as a weapon is an occult idea because they're going to imbue ancient things with powers beyond knowing. Okay. The Bible doesn't say if you take the ark around, you can use it as a
melt cities,
melt people's faces off.
I mean, there might be something in the Talmud. They had some quote in the movie that it seemed like they were reading from some kind of religious text. I don't remember the line.
But it's a very occult idea to be like, there's a secret special power in items or in nature or in this place or in a person like ESP that can be located and used. That is kind of the crux of what the occult is. So now I'll get into how Nosferatu has all these ideas that he's trying to show people. And I mean, I think it's clear that people really like to believe in the occult. Like humans like to believe in the occult. Yeah. Right. It's thrill. They like to be thrilled or entertained by the idea.
Who don't even think that they believe in the occult kind of do with even, I don't know, astrology or crystals.
Or having a lucky rabbit's foot.
Right. And Rudolf Steiner, who created Waldorf schools, he was into theosophy, which is also a mysticism in the occult. Right. And that's the whole school has some of that in it. So there's just a lot of regular folks that kind of believe in something occultish. And then there are hardcore occultists who are like, this is what I do. This is what I'm into. This is what my life is about. I super believe in these things. Right. So Albin Grau was in an occult society, and he was in a group, and he believed in this stuff. And so much he's like, I'm going to create a whole film studio, and we're going to make movies that teach people about the occult. So hold on. So the first idea that's pretty basic in Nosferatu is that just the idea that there are vampires. There are these supernatural immortal creatures, and they could be real. And just the idea that there could be a secret hidden world of people who are vampires is that's already an occult idea.
Right.
Okay. So then, Grau explicitly said that he met somebody in World War I. He was in the war, and he was stationed in Serbia, and he met a farmer who told him, my father was a vampire. And the farmer's father died and was buried without receiving the holy sacraments. And then months later, people started dying in the village, and then they saw the dead father like walking in the distance. So the villagers exhumed the coffin, and nobody was in it. So then they went back and got more people in the morning, and they came back to the coffin and opened it again, and he was in it. But he looked really like full of life, just like he was sleeping. But his face was like ruddy. He didn't look like he'd been dead for a month. But his front teeth were really long, like a vampire.
Absolutely incredible.
So they staked him in the heart, and then they burned his body.
That is fantastic.
Only way you can be sure.
That is the story that Grau told people.
Right.
You know, he might have made that up to like promote his movie about vampires.
Oh, could be. Could be.
Could be. So yeah, the basic idea that there might be supernatural creatures running around somewhere is an occult idea. And also the idea that these creatures are able to use blood to stay immortal. The quest for immortality is really big with the cultists. And also the power and purity of blood is kind of
sure.
big.
That's like the Holy Grail too.
Yes.
But you know, whatever Avril Lavigne got on. You know.
So Grau was a member of Fraternitas Saturni.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward.
He had a magical name, Master Pacitus.
Okay.
And this group he was in was like a whole hodgepodge of occult ideas of like they just pulled from every different kind of occult ideas, which is what most occult groups are. Not Wiccans per se, but a lot of occult groups are like, we believe in this and this and this, and we're pulling from everything.
Right, let's try a bunch of things, see what sticks.
Right. In Nosferatu, there's one scene where the Jonathan Harker of this movie, whose name is Thomas Hutter, he's given a job by his boss, Herr Nock, who is actually the Renfield type character, to go to Transylvania, set up a real estate deal with Count Dracula / Count Orlok. And this is the most occult movie about a realtor of all time. And I'm stealing that joke from Zoe when we were watching this movie.
Yeah, and I just laughed at it before you told them that it was my joke. So now I look like a jerk for laughing at my own joke.
Anyway, I always laugh at my own jokes.
I mean, they're funny. Anyway, Herr Nock has a contract from Count Orlok, the vampire, that's actually just fully written in occult symbols.
Right. If you look at the piece of paper that Renfield
then they show it.
Is,
he like holds it up and the camera looks at it.
It's like runes.
Yeah.
It's not in any actual alphabet. I don't think.
Right. And it's not occult symbols just made up by an art designer. It's actual like Enochian and Hermetic and other occult symbols in real occult books from...
Which is wild. They were like, we're going to slip our propaganda in here 100%.
They're not concerned about just copying out
Enochian symbols. They hadn't seen Army of Darkness yet. They just didn't know. So Herr Nock, he can totally read it, which is a clue that Nock is in on it. Although you might not understand that the first time you're watching, you're like, those are weird symbols, and this guy seems to be reading it, but you might not think that. But like, It's like, how can he read this weird magic writing? Because he is in on the thing with the vampire.
Another clue might be that he has fucking crazy eyes and is like laughing maniacally.
Yeah.
So that's another context clue, perhaps.
Right. And so Nock has kind of been opened up to the secret truths of the supernatural creature in the supernatural occult world, as shown by him being able to read this weird document full of all these occult symbols. So Thomas Hutter heads to Transylvania, and he meets some locals, and they tell him, like, don't go up to the castle. There's a vampire. And he's like, pish posh, you silly backwards people. But we know that they're right, because we know it's a vampire movie.
Right.
So this is another example of an occult idea, popular idea in the occult, that ancient or older people or people who are more like old-timey, they know old truths that modern society has forgotten. And so if you go amongst people who have like a more, I don't want to say primitive, because that's a bad word, but a society that is more connected to old ways and folk
even
ways.
Like pastoral societies.
a society that's more connected to the old folk ways,
Right.
they're going to know secret truths that modern society has inconveniently forgotten about magic. So that is and they're in this movie, they're right. There is a vampire up there.
And I wonder if that's kind of one of the progenitors of that whole trope in horror movies now of like, I see an old man at the gas station who's like, you better not go up there, kids, or you're gonna die. And they're like, haha, you're just a crazy old man.
Right.
I'm gonna fucking go up there
And die.
Oh no, I died.
So the locals, they give Thomas a little book about vampires. And they're like, read this book. And
he's like,
he laughs.
I think I'll read it later and not really apply it to my situation.
Right. He looks at it a little bit and he just kind of laughs about it. And this book is another example. Here's a book of secret knowledge with rules about how, with the secret rules of this occult thing we're telling you about, how the vampire lives, how he feeds, what can harm him. And that's another big thing in the occult is like, we'll find a book that has the secret. We'll go and we'll find an old book and it'll have the secrets to it. Or we'll write the book because we did some old research and we looked at the code in this book and we made up the rules,
Or it
that's
came
an
to
occult
me
thing.
in a wild dream and I
Right.
have to write it down in a book.
Right. Oh yeah. That's a big
I'll
one.
get to that later.
That's actually in this too. So then Thomas, he goes to the castle. He meets Count Orlok, who's like a very ancient creature, real ugly,
Oh,
rat-like.
he's kind of sweet.
But I wrote here in my notes, also sad and lonely.
I think he has like the eyes and expressions of a child that it really endears me to him.
Like a bald rat
I
child.
kind of
lonely
wanna,
child
I want to like
rat.
hug him.
Yeah, I know. I kind of want to hug him, especially well, actually both versions.
Both versions. It's something about being like bald with big ears. It's like, oh,
But he's pretty spooky. In the castle, in Count Orlok's domain, the German Expressionism is very strong. The shadows, the architecture, the way things move
chiaroscura.
it's very surreal. And in this, Thomas has now crossed over into a more magical realm because the place is even more, because the place is showing the psychology of the narrative. And in the castle, it's pretty fucked up, right?
Right.
So this is kind of to show how people who truly start to believe in the occult might feel, or imagine they might feel, when they finally experience proof that this hidden world really exists.
Right.
You feel like, am I crazy? I feel crazy that this thing, oh my God, this thing is really real, right? Because Thomas Hutter starts being like fainting all over the place and like falling down the stairs with shock, right? When he finally sees what's going on.
I'd like to think I would take it with a little more grace.
It's like he can't go through it alone. He can't handle it. The truth of this, and it's really reflected in the lighting and the architecture. So at the same time, Thomas's wife Nina, who is like a Lucy and Mina if they're put together,
Right.
is having nightmares about Thomas. And it's like what he is going through is so powerful that the person who loves him can feel it all the way in another country.
Right.
So this is occult ESP and dream magic. So this is a good example. A lot of people are like, I had have special dreams or say they have special feelings about like powerful events, right? Like, I had a dream that my grandfather spoke to me and then I woke up and I found out he had died. People say things like that. Right. Or I was washing the dishes and I broke a dish and then I got a text that my daughter was in a car accident. Sorry. I hope that. Anyways.
I wasn't going to think about.
My son was in a car accident. My sister was in a car accident. Okay. Anyways. And so I've heard people say things like that and that belief. So lots of people say things like that. But if you really were an occultist and you believed that like, if I had a powerful enough feeling I could send it to somebody, then you might be like, well, I'm going to fucking learn how to do that. If you really thought it could happen, you know, if you didn't think it could happen it was just by chance. But if you're like, oh, I could learn to manipulate this and actually use it.
Right. I mean, you can actually learn to lucid dream. So there's some things that it's like, at that time had not necessarily scientifically been proven one way or the other. It's like, okay, well, what about this can I control? Especially if it related to dream magic. It's like I can kind of make myself control my dreams sometimes.
So I'm going to try to.
So why can't I do that with like sending mental
Right. I'm going to send a
people?
message to my girlfriend from a distance. Yeah.
Right.
So Orlok, the vampire, he comes to town, to Germany, and he starts killing people. And folks think it's a plague because he travels with like way too many rats, and which people
Just a
also
lot of
associate
rats.
with a plague. And Herr Knock is going crazy all over town because the master's there. He's also psychically connected to the master, and so
Because he loves him so much and the master doesn't care about him back.
and Thomas is back and he's all fucked up about what he witnessed. And Nina is having psychic feelings that bad things are happening more than just a plague. Like she feels like there's something else going on. And she finds Thomas's little book on vampires and reads it and learns that like if a true-hearted woman can kill the vampire by offering herself to him and keeping him out until sunrise so the sun will kill him.
Right. It's like he has to like go back into his coffin of his ground that he brought here all the way from Transylvania.
Right.
Because he has to sleep in specific earth. So if you like make him feed on you all the way until the sun rises and he's not back in his coffin, then
Well, and the sun can kill him.
Right,
Well,
and this-
starting
yeah.
with this movie,
Right. So she, so in this part of the book is different, more different from Bram Stoker's Dracula, who introduces another very occult figure, Van Helsing.
Yes, there's a Van Helsing type figure in the movie, but it's not.
It's a much smaller role.
Right.
So Van Helsing is like a magician, occultist. He has and truly believes in secret knowledge about vampires. In this case, he has books about it. He has the paraphernalia you need. He has a cross. He has garlic, wooden stakes. He knows things like that Dracula has to sleep in dirt from his own country. He knows when he sees the puncture wounds, he knows that that's from a vampire. And he knows that Dracula can make other vampires. So he's like the occultist coming in saying, oh, like he's, like the Ghostbusters coming in saying, I have this information. I can share this with you and teach you. And this occult information, he initiates all these men who want to marry Lucy Westendra. She has a Dr. John Seward. There's also an American named Quincy Morris, and her actual guy, she like becomes her fiance, Arthur Holmwood. And then also Jonathan Harker, who came back from Transylvania. And with Van Helsing, he initiates them into all this esoteric occult knowledge, and they have to believe him. They don't have really a lot of proof, right? They just kind of have to say, you're telling me something and there is weird stuff going on, and now I'm going to believe what you're saying, even though I don't believe in vampires, right? But
so the guy who made this movie was like, do that. If a magician comes around telling you stuff, believe him.
Yeah, and so they go as a group to defeat Dracula, to try to save Lucy's immortal soul, save Mina, and that's why in a lot of occult circles I've learned Dracula is considered a foundational text because of how Van Helsing initiates these men into occult esoteric knowledge, and then they actually put it into practice.
Oh, very cool.
That's awesome.
And so and that's one of the reasons why Albin Grau chose Dracula to make his movie Nosferatu, is because it's considered like a really good example. But he left this part, he didn't use this part because then they're going to get sued, right? And they had to try to change everything.
Just do it verbatim.
Right. But they still got sued. But he has a character instead called Professor Bulwer, who is a physician who is teaching science to college students. And he's talking about carnivorous plants and maybe like carnivorous bacteria. He's kind of trying to tell them some stuff, but he's also dressed in like wizard robes.
I put on my robe and wizard hat.
Yeah. So he doesn't play as big a role as Van Helsing in the final film that we've seen, but there is a kind of character, the Van Helsing type character. But he doesn't, it's just this book that Lucy gets the book and she reads it. I mean, not Lucy. Nina gets the book from her husband and she reads it and she figures out what she's going to do. And this...
We're now said feminism.
So Nina reads the book that Thomas brings back. She decides to handle it herself. And that like her purity, her blood will trap Count Orlok until sunrise. And of course, occultists are really into the idea that like your willpower and your blood or other things you can do with your body can create powerful magic.
Yeah, I mean, will is the thing.
The intent of it.
Right.
And
right.
I've looked into Wicca in the past. more deeply. And I think this idea of like will, like I will it to be so, and that's how you manifest things.
Right. I've heard that the whole thing with a cross repelling vampires, like if an atheist picks up a cross, it wouldn't work. It's not about the cross. It's about the faith,
The
and
belief in it, right.
and
shit.
the will.
So a Jewish
basically.
person will work
Because
for you.
I have a whole vampire hunting kit, and I've collected some like a rosary and like a crucifix. Isn't that gonna work? Well, but I
It will
believe
if
it's
you
gonna work,
believe it'll
even
work.
though I don't believe in a Catholic God.
I'm not. It was a little unclear. Is
Maybe
it the
my
is it
Star
the
of David
belief,
would do something.
Is it the absolute belief in God, or is it the absolute belief that the cross will repel the vampire?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. But if it's the latter, you could get creative. It doesn't have to be a cross. It could be anything. It could be like a croissant.
And then they just like grab the croissant and eat it and throw up a lot because they're not supposed to eat things other than blood. So, yeah, I mean, Nina's like, I'm going to use my willpower. I'm going to handle this. I got this book. I understand. I'm going to draw him and keep him here until I can kill him because he's like a plague in our whole city. And my husband is like a little crazy now. So that's what she does. And
it works.
yeah. And so I hope I've been able to show you how this is considered an occult film, because all these occult ideas that are really normalized now. And
Right. I wouldn't look at it and be like, that's occult propaganda. But it is.
Yeah,
it's because the propaganda works.
the propaganda worked. It is in so many movies about any supernatural thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of like sci-fi too in some ways.
Was like, I want you to know these things, and we're like, we know them now. Like no, but for real, like we digested a lot of that stuff and incorporated it into like popular culture.
It is. But it wasn't Murnau, it was Albin Grau who wanted.
Right.
Murnau is like, I'm just a great filmmaker and I will make you a great film. So, but I do want to talk about Murnau a little bit. I thought I wrote some notes on here. Oh yeah. As I said, Murnau is a great filmmaker, and you should watch Nosferatu, but you should also watch Sunrise, which is a beautiful movie. Considered one of the best films of all time. I watched it recently, and I would put it on a short list of the best films I've ever seen. It's also a silent film. It's the best silent film I've ever seen. And Murnau was openly homosexual.
Yeah, he's not French. He's German. So who would be Murnau?
Okay.
He's openly homosexual, which in the 1920s was a pretty brave thing to be. He came to the U.S. to make films, and he hoped it would be safer for him here than in Germany. But he died pretty young, young in his 50s, early 50s, in a car accident. And then, this is like a little addendum that you should just know because of this podcast, and we're talking about the occult, is maybe because he directed a very famous gothic horror occult film, his grave was disturbed and his skull was stolen. And people say that maybe it was being used in an occult rite because there are burned down candles left at the gravesite.
Oh,
That's
wow.
crazy. So that's kind of what I want. Well, so, okay.
Wait, that's what you want for your grave. You want to be buried and then people go in and desecrate your grave and steal your skull.
No, I want, before I am buried, for my skull to be removed from my corpse.
Maybe that'll even happen at the moment you die.
Right. Well, no, because it needs to be in the correct hands, which are the hands of whomever's playing Hamlet at just the nearest theater. I don't need it to be, some big hoity-toity theater. I just, I think my head's been used for a lot of good already, but I really want it to continue to be used after my death for Shakespearean actors who want to do local theater and handle a real skull.
All right, Brian, that's on you.
That's on me.
Yeah,
Make sure that people handle her skull.
Find a good taxidermist or something.
Taxidermist to remove your skull.
But this is a PSA to any of our listeners that if that doesn't happen, I suppose you can desecrate my grave and take my skull.
I'm editing this out. So
we were at the Mutter Museum, and your skull seemed to match like the smallest 22-year-old girl skull there.
Yorick could have been little.
I think your skull should be used in a kids' production of Hamlet.
Messed
like that
up.
time that you won't cut this out. Like that time that you make kids touch raw meat.
That's my shame.
now
You're
lick your
airing my
fingers, kids.
shame.
Lick them all off.
Okay. So I'm going to set Zoe up a little bit, even though she is going to go last, as she does. That in 1925, 3 years after Nosferatu came out, Albin Grau was at the WADA conference, an international meeting of occult leaders in Germany. Albin was there as a master in this occult group called Pansophilia. Other attendees included Eugene Grosch, master of the Danzig Lodge, Otto Grebharder, of something, and they were part of a Rosicrucian occult lodge called Collegium Pansophiacum, and also Aleister Crowley with his entourage of Leah Hersig, Dorothy Olsen, and Norman Mudd.
Of course, this motherfucker has an entourage.
He really fucking
Aleister
did.
Yes.
Crowley.
Well, you said with his entourage. I'm like, which one? 'Cause
Yeah. So there was a whole group gathering of occult leaders in Europe, and there was a big falling out that we don't have to get into, but if you want to look it up, you can look up, just Google Albin Grau, Aleister Crowley, and there'll be the whole story of the falling out between these German occultists and how Aleister Crowley was like, follow me, I'm the leader. And some of them were like, you're not our leader.
I have no patience for that kind of drama and gossip. And,
That occult drama is off the hook. All right, but first, we're going to talk to Brian and some true events from his mouth.
okay, yes, the
From
true
whatever
events from
you're
my
talking
mouth.
about.
Actually, you mentioned that you were setting Zoe up
Mm-hmm.
for when she eventually talks. You set me up too.
Did I?
You did, and you knew you were doing it.
Oh, there
Because
was some sneaking around
there
that
are
I
no
didn't pick up on
accidents.
because I was so happy that you were doing my thing for me, but you slid in something for someone else also.
Yeah, I'm a giver.
Well, I'm looking into the connection between vampires and plagues because plague is a very big part of the Nosferatu movie. But as I do, I'm going back in time. And I thought I would touch on, where these legends come from, because there is no real start. I guess you could say that the vampire is the start of the suave, elegant vampire.
Right, the
and-
Byronic vampire.
Yeah, and there is a place in history where there's the start of avoiding the sun or drinking blood or this or that, or there are various stages where the legend of the vampire comes together. But it's thought that originally we're looking at Mesopotamia. The Persians were one of the first civilizations thought to have tales of these kinds of monsters. Creatures attempting to drink blood from men are depicted on excavated pottery shards from ancient Persia.
Wait,
Can we get some of those?
they're drinking blood from men specifically?
Yep. Drinking blood from men are depicted on the pottery shards. Yep.
I would like to see this.
Okay. Here's a picture.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Wow, audience, I wish you
That's
could see this.
crazy.
I'm showing them the picture that they want to see right now, and it's awesome.
So good.
It's a real picture.
We're really looking at it.
Okay, then in ancient Babylonia, they had tales of the mythical Lilitu, synonymous with and giving rise to Lilith in Hebrew, and her daughters, the Lilu. And Lilith was considered a demon and was often depicted as subsisting on the blood of babies.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, you totally can't subsist on the blood of babies.
It's not
It just
nearly
doesn't-
enough blood.
It doesn't have the full amino acids that you need to.
I just mean they're doing Lilith wrong. Don't be so mean to Lilith. Is what I'm saying.
I mean, this is the original story. They hadn't done anything to her at that point. Then we fast forward a bit to ancient Greece. They had precursors to modern vampires, but none of them were considered undead.
Wait, are you skipping Judaism? I know one from Judaism. An estry?
Estry.
That's something I learned about a few years ago. There's like a old Jewish type vampire vampire type thing that are women called estries that I think they maybe like fly with their hair or something when they go and
Well,
drink
that's
people's
interesting
blood.
because they do have the aluka, literally translated as leech. That's synonymous with vampirism, and motet's dam is literally bloodsucker. And then, of course, the Jewish diaspora in Europe brought a lot of these stories with them, and they mixed with Slavic stuff, and I mean, eventually, that's where proto-vampires come from. Is this mix? But we haven't even left ancient Greece yet. We're kind of skipping forward. They had the Empusa was the daughter of the goddess Hecate and was described as demonic and bronze-footed. And she feasted on blood by transforming into a young woman and seducing men as they slept, so she could drink their blood.
Like you're gonna seduce someone while they sleep.
Get in there and give them a
Seems
sexy dream.
Non-consensual.
Yeah.
Like seduce them and drink their blood while they're awake, please. Consent is important.
The Lamia.
Oh yeah.
Was the daughter of King Belus and a secret lover of Zeus.
Yeah.
But Zeus's wife Hera discovered the infidelity and killed all of Lamia's offspring.
As per usual.
Yep.
Hera.
She swore vengeance, Lamia swore vengeance and preyed on young children in their beds at night, sucking their blood.
Right.
So, more Lilith type story there. The Strigas feasted on children, but also now they preyed on adults too, like equal opportunity bloodsuckers.
Wasn't there something called Striga Nona? Was that like
Straganona.
Straganona. Is that a witch?
Strigoi is a...
Oh,
Strigoi,
yeah. I don't know where I've heard these. But
Straganona is like a children's book. It's like about a grandma, maybe.
Okay, well, maybe
I thought the book was
evil.
the Straganomicon. So the Strigas were described as having the bodies of crows.
Cool.
And they were later incorporated into the Roman mythology as Strix, a nocturnal bird that feeds on human flesh and blood. So all this stuff is going on, even in the Odyssey. Vampiric entities are seen. The undead are too insubstantial to be heard by the living and can't communicate with them without drinking blood first.
Wait, that's actually, I never put that together because I was just doing a whole thing. It's in the Aeneid too, that I was just doing a whole project on it. And I never thought about that like they have to go drink blood before they can like become real enough to...
But it didn't have to be human. And Odysseus, he sacrificed a black ram and a black ewe so that the shades there could drink its blood and communicate. So it is vampiric because it's drinking blood, but it's also very reminiscent of the very common have to make a sacrifice.
Right.
And the ram and the ewe are very valuable to society at that point. It's
common sacrificial animals.
Yeah. But if we go to ancient India, so now we're talking about cultures that may not have mixed that much. This may have been an independent development of the ideas of vampirism. The Vetalas, ghoul-like beings that inhabit corpses. The Betal is described as an undead creature who, like the bat associated with modern-day vampirism, hangs upside down on trees, found on cremation grounds and cemeteries.
Ooh, I think people have thought about that because anytime I'm walking under a bunch of trees at night, I'm totally thinking there's something up there going to drop down on me. So if that ever happened even once, I would for sure tell that story to everyone I know. Always,
Especially if you're in a cemetery.
So as we were talking about with the Jewish diaspora mixing with Slavic folklore, we start having proto-vampires of a type that we might actually recognize as vampires instead of having to stretch the imagination and say they drink blood, therefore. So before they actually had that name, there's evidence of vampires in Slavic belief. In particular, it dates back to the 9th century in terms of history. So it's likely much older than that. And now we are talking about strigoi. That's what these were called. In the 14th century, Serbian legal codes existed to ban what they called vampire burials. Huh. So sometimes before burying an apparently deceased plague victim, the grave diggers would place a stone in the corpse's mouth to prevent future blood sucking, which shows
super cool.
Very effectively that the belief of the vampire was not just extant and old, but it was a problem significant enough that attempts were made to eradicate it, and they codified it in some kind of historical document that we
Yeah.
could later find and say by the 14th century,
Right.
this was common in where did I say this was?
Serbia.
In Serbia.
Is it going to be antithetical to my goal of being a vampire if I have my whole head removed before I'm buried? Because I was going to say, don't put the stone in my mouth. I want to be a
Yeah,
vampire.
you can't come
Yeah.
back if you have no head.
Shucks,
That's
we're
one of the
going to
main
have to mull
ways.
that over.
Yeah.
Maybe in Sleepy Hollow. Okay. And then during
We're
the
not that far from Sleepy Hollow if that's where you want to be buried.
I'll think it over. Because then I really, it could be a whole headless thing. Or nearly headless.
Nearly headless Zoe. So during the Black Plague, the myth of vampirism really developed, likely due to superstitions involving burying corpses of sick plague victims who were coughing up blood but had not yet died. So the post-mortem movements and bloody mouth of these cases led people in the country to believe that the undead had been feasting on their neighbor's blood, protecting them from actually dying, kind of preserving them so they could continue to drink.
Wow.
And that's where these burials came from, to help people be at rest.
Wow.
I was also, are you going to talk about like the teeth or fingernails at all?
No.
Well, then I'll throw that in. I think like your skin kind of shrivels or recedes, and that makes it look like your fingernails are longer.
Oh, yes.
And like that your teeth are longer than a normal person because the fleshy part's kind of shriveling away from the... And so that's kind of also, if you were to go and look at a corpse and be like, what's up with this corpse? Is it a vampire? And then it has like longer fingers and
Right.
like the teeth look longer.
Yeah, there are
Fingernails,
rumors
I mean.
that hair and fingernails grow after you die. And what you described is
Right. They
why
don't
people think
grow.
that.
The other stuff shrinks away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're talking about the word vampires. These things finally have a name. And the folklore for the entity we know today as the vampire originates almost exclusively from early 18th century southeastern Europe, particularly Transylvania. Not because that's where the legends existed, but because Transylvania recorded and published in writing the things that were oral tradition before that. So the writings come from there in much the same way as the Spanish plague
Right.
is the Spanish plague, because it was published from
Right.
there. And so people associate
doesn't
vampirism
come-
with Transylvania.
Right. It doesn't, the Spanish plague didn't come from Spain. It's just one of the places where they were willing to say that it was happening and talking about
Right.
it. Yeah.
Right. So the term vampire was popularized in Western Europe after reports of an 18th century mass hysteria of a pre-existing folk belief in the Balkans and Eastern Europe that in some cases resulted in corpses being staked and people being accused of vampirism. In most cases, vampires are revenants of evil beings, suicide victims, or witches, but can also be created by a malevolent spirit possessing a corpse or a living person being bitten by a vampire themselves. And the culminating point of all these ancient beliefs here in the 18th century was called the Great Vampire Epidemic,
Nice.
or sometimes referred to just as the vampire epidemic, when people believed vampires were not only real, but suddenly appearing in large numbers for unknown reasons all throughout Eastern Europe.
Wow.
Yep.
That'd be cool if that were true.
After a case in Serbia in 1725, where people believed a vampire had appeared and caused illness, soon another case arose in 1726, and hysteria concerning vampires began to spread throughout Eastern Europe and even parts of Western Europe. Now, we kind of covered vampire as a word, but what about Nosferatu? Now, Nosferatu translates as bringer of plague. It's really interesting because the word Nosferatu is based on an incorrect transliteration from Cyrillic of Nesuferit, which itself translates as the insufferable one.
So that's what they were going for.
They made a mistake with the word that now means bringer of plague.
Which really works.
It does. And this is well after the connection between plague and vampire existed. There was plague it made some symptoms, then people created the legend of vampire to explain those symptoms.
So it's like a very happy coincidence that they accidentally translated it to mean that.
Yeah, it's
So it was actually a woman travel writer.
Emily Gerard.
Okay.
In 1888, she wrote The Land Beyond the Forest, which is a study of the history and culture of Transylvania. And it references the same mistransliteration that it found 20 years earlier in Germany, which was possibly the source that Gerard used. I wasn't able to track down like who actually made the mistransliteration and when. But this book, The Land Beyond the Forest, put that word out there. Now Nosferatu is published for people to read. And Bram Stoker read that book and used the word in Dracula in 1897, which is only 9 years later. And so it was a contemporary book that he took the word from. Now I'm going to talk about some diseases that that kind of have maybe the disease that people thought was vampirism.
I do just want to say, I like that Nosferatu isn't a real word.
Right, but then like Bram Stoker picked it out specifically and was like, I like this. And then Murnau must have been like, picked it out from Dracula and was like, well, we can't say Dracula. So like it really, at any of those steps along the way, it could have been like, well, this is a nonsense word. Let's not use it. But people kept picking it.
Yeah.
And Murnau was probably like, no, I didn't get that from Dracula. It was from
this travel writer.
Don't you know it means bringer of plagues?
So I kind of went on a tangent here with trying to find diseases that
are like vampirism.
Yeah, that if you had this disease, that people in those times wouldn't have some other explanation for it. They don't have germ theory. They don't, there's a lot of illiterate, uneducated farmers, peasants, out in the middle of nowhere that I mean, I don't know, even people in the city probably wouldn't know where these diseases come from. But pellagra was a niacin deficiency, vitamin B3. And areas of the skin exposed to either sunlight or friction get inflamed when you have a niacin deficiency. And over time, the affected skin can become darker, stiffen, peel, or bleed. So if you spend time in the sun, it's like you have an allergy to the sun.
Yeah.
I just remember that time that I had a surgery right before I went to summer camp, and whatever medicine they put me on, which is also like a medicine for acne, I guess, but to help me from recover from the surgery, they were like, you can't go out in the sun. And I was about to go to summer camp, so I just carried like an umbrella around and wore really big floppy hats and like huge sunglasses, and I don't know what they must have thought. Like
Zoe came to school. She's a vampire now.
I wonder if the issue there being on that medicine is that the medicine
gives
blocked,
me a deficiency of vitamin
if it blocked
B.
the niacin and gave you temporary
Maybe
pellagra.
so.
But the Native American cultivators who first domesticated corn prepared it by nixtamalization, where the grain is treated with a solution, a basic solution of lime. And nixtamalization makes the niacin nutritionally available and prevents pellagra. When corn was cultivated worldwide and eaten as a staple without nixtamalization, pellagra became pretty common because it was replacing wheat and other things. It was now a staple food, but without the secret sauce, without the making the niacin
right recipe.
available.
It's like scurvy, but for a different thing.
But that probably eliminates it as a culprit in our search for what disease causes vampirism, because they had to discover the new world. They had to start trade, introduce maize. It became a staple in the 18th century. Basically, pellagra didn't exist in Europe until the 18th century, after corn was introduced. So it could have acted as a verifier of vampirism, but not a source of the legends. So another one is porphyria, which chronic porphyria primarily manifests with skin disease, encountered where excess porphins accumulate in the skin. I guess it's too technical for me, but porphins are molecules that we don't want to be in our skin. They're photoactive. An exposure to light results in promotion of electrons to a higher energy level. And when these return to the resting energy level or ground state, energy is released. So heat, yes. It's released as heat, but it's also, there's a property of fluorescence typical of the porphins. And it causes local skin damage, but it can also cause glowing after you've been in the sun, and now you're inside and they're returning to their base energy level and releasing the energy. Some of it is released as fluorescence.
Wait, so
Are you for real?
can I do that on purpose and glow?
It's a disease. I don't know how you get
Can
it.
I specifically get this disease on purpose so that I can glow?
So that's like the Twilight vampire disease.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's been suggested as an explanation for the origin of vampires and werewolves, based on certain perceived similarities between the condition and the folklore. The theory has been rejected by a few folklorists and researchers as not accurately describing the characteristics of the original werewolf and vampire legends.
Right, they didn't glow.
Or the disease itself. And they further suggest that it's potentially stigmatizing people with porphyria, because that still exists.
Okay.
And so the last one on the list, and maybe the most likely, is rabies.
Really?
It's a common source of both vampire and werewolf legends. You get bitten by an infected animal,
Right.
and you literally go feral before
Literally could
dying.
be a bat.
I mean, I think
Yeah,
it
that's
seems
true.
very likely that that it could explain lycanthropy.
Yeah.
You get bitten, and I don't know, probably a month later. Why not? It takes a while for rabies to fully take effect, but you get bitten, and a while later, you kind of go feral because you have this disease. So that maybe vampirism as well, but rabies has been around a long time in Europe, and so that's a possibility too.
Wow.
Peter Parker's like, I got bitten by a radioactive spider, and Nosferatu's like, I got bitten by a bat with rabies, so that's me now.
Yeah. So back to the movie. Vampires are usually associated with bats, but in Nosferatu they use rats, and because they want to make this connection with the plagues. Yeah.
Which felt really like unsettlingly relevant watching it right now.
Sure.
And they were like, oh, this plague is devastating the landscape. I'm like,
Yeah. Oh, but can I also say there's a part where Nosferatu is walking around this town just carrying his whole ass coffin just underneath one arm.
It's so funny.
And you know the coffin is like full of dirt. So it's a whole full coffin
Yeah.
full of dirt. And he's just carrying it under one arm as he walks around the whole
It's
town
like-
looking
I
for
wanted-
his
He did not
apartment.
at all look menacing.
I want to make a gif of it. It's
so
it's
funny.
really like
We'll
the
make-
most common, like mundane. He has it under
It's like a
one
purse.
arm.
It's like
this
it's his
whole
purse.
coffin, he's just kind of like looking around, just kind of like, where am I
Or
supposed
like
to go
he's
with
carrying
this?
like a bag of groceries home, but he doesn't.
Right, and then
but he's
like,
lost. He's
I
like,
don't know where I am.
where's my
Well, the
house?
groceries are in the coffin.
It's so good. It's so funny.
We're gonna put that out as like a gif
Yeah, we'll have to
on our
find it.
Twitter.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Okay, so back to the
The rats.
The focus on rats.
It made me
which-
think about it because when they open up the
Yeah.
coffin, it's just full of rats.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and rats, carried fleas, which spread bubonic plague. There's been more recent studies, came out very recently, about how plagues could have been spread person to person, but there are different plagues. There's
The black
infections
plague.
of the lungs. There's the pneumonic plague. There's bubonic plague, which you absolutely could get from the boils and stuff if you touch. But it wasn't airborne. And if you're going to get it at a distance, you're going to get it still by touch, but because of the fleas and because of
Right.
the rats carrying the fleas from person to person. It's just different kinds of plagues are spread differently. And this one, very much rats. And you mentioned how Count Orlok's face resembles a rat, and that's not on accident.
Ooh.
it all ties together, and
Everything
Murnau
is
knew what he was doing.
connected.
Murnau knew what he was doing. So between 1918 and 1920, Germany lost almost 300,000 people in the Great Flu pandemic, the Spanish flu,
Wow.
which killed 50 million worldwide. And so that happened right after the Great War, and the Germans were put out.
To say the least.
And
They
the
were
movies,
put out.
the contemporary movies of that time reflect that. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Golem, Warning Shadows, Tired Death, and Nosferatu. All
Yeah, they were
very
going
dark.
through some stuff.
Yeah.
Psychologically as a country.
And this was a way to shake that out. Sometimes a population needs to hide from their troubles with uplifting films. Sometimes they need to sink into them and experience it and get through it that way. And that's what the Germans seem to have chosen based on the movies that got into theaters. And then the scenes where the vampire brings death to a captain and his crew on the ship.
On the ship.
Pilots the ghost ship into the harbor, where hundreds of rats scurry off to infect the city, is literally from history. In 1348, again, this is the year of the big bubonic plague outbreak. In 1348, 3 ships carrying spices docked at Genoa, Italy, and they were also loaded with rats that scurried down the anchor lines and disappeared into the city. The rats died by the thousands, and then the people began to die. And that was the beginning of the Black Death, right there. And probably Murnau knew of that and used the ship and the rats fleeing the ship as an allegory. I thought it was interesting. In real life, the story that I've just told shows how plague was interpreted as vampirism, and the story of vampires came because people wanted to make sense of the plagues.
And now it's like in reverse. Like we're going to use,
in the movie,
vampires as an allegory for the plague.
the vampire was real. The vampire was killing the people.
Right.
And they had to make sense of it by blaming it on a plague. And they put plague on people's doors. They marked people's doors and tried to keep it from spreading. Because like you said, Heather, where Counterlock came from, they believed in vampires.
Right.
But then when they got to Bremen,
They
did not believe in vampires, and so they needed a different story, and they blamed it on the plague.
Right.
Wouldn't it be wild if that was like part of the Passover story? It's like you got locusts, you got frogs, you got vampires who come and I don't know,
vampires
and drink the blood of your firstborn baby.
I thought you were going to say a plague of locusts, a plague of frogs, a plague of plague.
Basically.
I did read a quote that I think it was Albin Grau who also said that the plague, it was like, or the vampire and the plague, it's like war. And it's something that came and just indiscriminately killed all these people, and that war was just a plague. Wow. And that was part of what he was working on.
That was the first world war that anyone had ever seen. And plagues are probably one of the things that before that touched a lot of countries,
globally.
Not just like a skirmish in one area of the world. Like there is now a plague all across Europe. So I can see how like war would feel like that if it's like the first time like people in so many different countries are dying.
Yeah, and across Europe, the actual active blowing things up and shooting things was happening in population centers and not just on some distant battlefield where only the young men were dying. Everybody was dying.
Right.
So that's the end of my story.
All right.
What have you got, Zoe?
Zoe.
I'm just going to talk about... That's okay, you can hype me up.
It didn't turn into a chant, though, did it?
It felt like it was going
Zoe.
I'm going to be talking about, no biggie, just the saint of Satan, the great beast, the wickedest man alive. That's right. Let's talk about Aleister Crowley, kids. Whatever,
Yay!
kids.
Kids, go get your kid. Listeners, go get your kids now.
Get your kids so that we can
Bring
talk
'em
about
in.
sex magic.
We'll talk about Aleister Crowley, the Satanist.
Yeah,
The
this
saint
is
of Satan?
not actually, but he
Yeah.
did call himself that, but he wasn't really, and he knew he wasn't.
He was just a wicked
He
man.
wanted to cash in on
He was never
we'll
actually
get to that.
canonized?
He was not actually into Satanism. He was into occultism. This is a dude so bad, and I don't just think he's bad, because as you're going to learn in this story, like, he did a lot of actually really kind of interesting things, but he was fundamentally so actually wicked that he, at one point, and we'll get here, but went to Italy, got kicked out of Italy for being such a bad person by Benito Mussolini. That's the standard that we're talking about here. So, for context, he's born in 1875. He dies in 1947. So he's living through both world wars. And he is born to some parents who are like evangelical Christian. His dad was originally a Quaker, but both his mom and his dad converted to being the exclusive Brethren faction
In
of,
England.
Right, in England. The exclusive Brethren faction of Christian fundamentalists, evangelical.
Well, that shit's going to make you a crazy
Well,
occultist.
Right, a little bit. His dad would read a chapter
It's like 50-50.
a chapter of the Bible to the family every day after breakfast. Like, they were in it. He was sent to an evangelical Christian boarding school.
I mean, it's kind of a good book. I made a funny face and Zoe flipped me off. You're
Sorry,
wicked.
bad manners. Don't let your kids listen
So he's
anymore.
hoping to get away with that because we're not recording video.
He after this Christian boarding school, he was sent to a prep school, and he said that Crowley later said that the reverend who ran this prep school in Cambridge was like a sadist, and was just
Chill.
horrible.
Sure.
So Crowley already is starting out with like a basis of like a lot of religion and like spirituality.
Too much religion, maybe.
Really in his life. And especially I think if your parents like converted to that religion, it's not just they were like
They're
they
gung-ho,
chose that and
right.
they were like really into it. At least his dad did. I don't know how much say his mom had. He actually liked his dad. Or at least after his dad's death, which happened when he was 11, when Aleister Crowley was 11. His dad died of tongue cancer. And Crowley was very, very shaken by
Cigar
it.
smoker?
Maybe. He was like, my dad is my hero. He did not share the same sentiments about his mom. I mean, this is coming from like, for sure, just a horrible misogynist, so that might have played some role of it in it. But after his dad dies when he's 11, he inherits a bunch of money. But he also goes a little off the rails. He starts misbehaving a lot at school. He gets sick and he's pulled out of that school and goes to a different college and he hates it and leaves, and goes to a different college and he hates it and leaves. And the way they describe it is, he was smoking, masturbating, bad things, and
This guy.
got gonorrhea from having sex with sex workers.
Okay, I'm out now.
Well, I know
should've stuck to the
smoking and
masturbating.
masturbating was fine.
I was on board until we got to the...
But he also
gonorrhea.
was an intellectual. He loved the works of Percy Shelley. He was the president of his chess club, and he almost decided to be a professional chess player. And imagine how different the world would be right now if Aleister Crowley had just stuck to chess.
The chess would have become evil.
Chess would have been way cooler.
Chess would have been a lot more fucked up. But he also, and this will come back, this is important, it will come back. He also was very into mountain climbing. And he like climbed the Alps. But that will come back. He did that like every year. He went to Trinity College. So he's kind
In
of
Dublin.
in Dublin. And he wanted to study philosophy, but he decided to change it to English lit because he was like, I fucking love Percy Shelley. I love, he decided he was into it.
I can see that you are identifying with this evil man.
At this point, you know why? Here's my next sentence. Crowley is bisexual, having relationships with men and
right.
women. He also gets syphilis from a sex worker.
Ooh,
So now he
ouch.
at least has had gonorrhea and syphilis, probably more throughout his lifetime.
He's working on his collection.
It doesn't help because then he's having sex with a lot of other people. He probably gave a lot of STDs to people because I don't think Crowley was
Not
wrapping it up.
Not chill.
And same-sex relationships were illegal in England in the late 1800s. So he was doing a lot of very taboo things, but he was also like, I like English literature and playing chess and going mountaineering. But
He's very well-rounded.
Yeah, well, he kind of has a turning point in 1897. He gets really sick and thinks he's gonna die. But he gets better, and he feels like that was like his brush with death. He decides to become a full-time occultist. He's like, I almost died. I just came back. I am really
He's like, I need to get a job as a full-time occultist.
I never want to die again.
Who's hiring? Let's break up on the one ends.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly full-time occultist means. I think I mean, actually, I know what it means. It's that how he got his revenue. For a lot of his life, he was just like, I'm going to become the head of the chapter of this magical institution, and you all have to pay me money.
Yeah.
And
then he goes to Germany. He's like, you guys are, I'm ahead of you too.
Yeah. Well, he also thought of himself as a poet and a writer. So his first bunch of poetry collection is called White Stains. And
I hear his poetry and writing is really bad.
I've also heard that it's quite bad. I mean, let's just talk about his and it's erotic poetry, and it's called White Stains.
I'm very upset about this, Zoe.
It was not allowed to be printed in England, so he went and printed it abroad.
Oh yeah, everything can be printed in Germany.
Like New Jersey, everything is legal. He decides that he's gonna get into alchemy, right? He's like, I'm all in. So he meets this chemist named Julian L. Baker, and this guy's brother-in-law is George Cecil. Oh, okay. I really went right in between. Is it Cecil or Cecil? Because they're both valid, and I did not commit.
Well, Cecil
I went
is
right
probably invalid.
Cecil?
What?
They're British?
They're British.
Cecil,
it makes me think it's
Probably
Cecil.
Cecil.
So what we're not going to say again is Cecil.
Cecil.
George C.
Jones, who was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which yes, well,
that's big time. Sure. They're bad,
right,
but I mean
they are. That was W.B. Yeats.
If you look into the occult, that's one of the main ones.
Arthur Conan Doyle, arguably Bram Stoker.
I would argue with that.
Bram Stoker is often referenced as someone who was in the group, but his name was maybe just on a list of like people that
we wish were in the group.
Literally, people who have died who we think their ghosts would be in our group.
That's what they did. But yeah, a lot of cool poets and writers and stuff were part of this group, and maybe Bram Stoker was.
Right. So a lot of people that you've heard of, probably if you like literature mostly. So he's like, I'm going to do this. He becomes, he's initiated into the group. He takes the magical name Frater Perdurabo, which
rolls right off the tongue.
He interpreted, which I like the way that's phrased, like perhaps it was incorrect, but he interpreted it as I shall endure to the end, which we'll see if he does.
I was sure it would have something to do with a brother.
Well, it's probably brother I shall endure to the end.
Well, the frater is, but the parbu...
Perdurabo. Because maybe
part.
it's like, I don't know.
That's
I'm not
the
try to
persisting
pretend
one.
I know Latin.
I will. I'll pretend it.
Right. So he... Okay, so he invited the senior members. Some of these people are going to come back, so you don't have to remember their names. You'll probably remember George Cecil Jones because we made such a big deal about it. But this other dude is named Alan Bennett. He is like, hey, Alan, will you come live with me as a personal magic tutor? And Alan Bennett was like, fuck yeah. And so they start doing lots of ritual drugs and I think he might have started getting into sex magic at this point. It's a fine line when you're doing magic and you're having a lot of weird sex already. It's like at some point they're just
the same thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that became a problem with the Order of the Golden Dawn because he wanted to join their second inner secreter circle. And they were like, you're kind of like doing a lot of sex stuff that we're not super into. You're bisexual, which is illegal right now. You're like a libertine. And also he had a feud with Yeats. I'm not sure what about. Probably Aleister Crowley being a dickwad.
I'm going to side with Yates.
Yeah, and so they were like,
Over
we do
Aleister
not
Crowley.
want you in the inner circle because you're a actual weirdo.
Right.
And that's coming from occultists.
Yeah.
But the leader of the Golden Dawn, Mathers, a guy named Mathers, is like, no, I'm personally I like Crowley, even though all the rest of you don't, and I'm going to personally initiate him myself if you guys won't do it. And the rest of the whole London chapter did not like their leader, Mathers, because they're like, he's authoritarian, he's like not leading our group well. So there became a kind of a schism after he did that. He's like, no, I'm picking Crowley. So Mathers and Crowley split off from the rest of the group. But they also try to like sue them. They're like, we want the space that we've been hanging out in.
I thought you were going to say the name of the group.
No, they're like, we want the London Lodge. Like, we're going to try to like take this space. And the court is like, no, that's not how it works. They're the ones who are paying for it. So Crowley is kind of out from that group. There's just this guy Mathers. So Crowley's like, okay, well, fuck, I'm done being in London for now. That, kind of worked, but I'm gonna just explore the world. He was writing poetry and going to Mexico, to Japan, to Hong Kong, to Ceylon, where he met up with his pal Alan Bennett, who had been his personal magic tutor. And Bennett was like, I'm gonna become a Buddhist monk, which, you know what, probably was better in his life than continuing to hang out with Aleister Crowley. Crowley is like, I'm still into mountaineering. So he was still climbing mountains, but he got like snow blindness, he got influenza, he got malaria just from... So at this point, malaria, influenza, snow blindness, syphilis, gonorrhea. He was not very careful with his body, perhaps.
Yeah. But he's like, I'm going to be immortal, so I can just do all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I think if that were me, I would pursue immortality.
Yeah.
Something that would help with all that.
He went to Paris next. The snow blindness did not kill him. And he... Did
you have any dates happening?
Oh, this is before, it's like late 1800 turning into the 1900s.
Okay, thanks.
So he goes to Paris and he meets Rodin. He meets Rilke. And he meets a painter named He meets a painter named Gerald Kelly, whose sister is going to be in this arranged marriage that she hates. So Aleister Crowley is like, I'll marry you instead. We don't love each other or anything, but I'll marry you so you don't have to be in this arranged marriage. And her brother, who's his friend, is like very scandalized. The whole family is like, we don't like you marrying into our family. But it's actually kind of a sweet story because he actually falls in love with her after deciding to marry her not in love.
Can I say Aleister Crowley, who he reminds me of?
Who?
Rasputin.
Well, Rasputin was also an occultist, kind of, right?
And with the big D going around having sex with everyone.
D.
I mean, I don't know that
with all of the things that happened to him.
But also gross.
Right. Well, so far, he hasn't done anything too bad, but we're gonna get to some nasty shit.
Okay, great.
Actually, like, immediately. So,
okay.
So he falls in love with her. He's like, I'm writing poetry about you. And they're like, let's go to Cairo and say that we are a prince and princess and we worship Egyptian deities now. So we are a prince and princess, which I guess you can just say decide to do. But Rose, his wife now, becomes like delirious. I don't know, maybe from all the illnesses that they're contracting. And is like, Aleister, the god Horus is waiting for you. The equinox of the gods has come. And he says that on April of 1904, Aleister Crowley supposedly hears a disembodied voice who goes, I am Aiwas, the messenger of Horus. There's going to be a new moral law of this eon, and that moral law will be, do what thou wilt. You are the prophet. You gotta tell this to the world.
Kind of is.
So, I mean, if there's definitely a world in which he fucking made all of this up for money or fame.
Yeah.
But there's also a world in which he, was on a lot of drugs and,
Right, and he
having a
believed
lot of
it,
illnesses.
right.
And he really thought that, if his wife was going around being like, Horus is waiting for you. We're in Egypt. We're trying to worship Egyptian deities, that he really did have some kind of vision and decided to roll with it. And he really went hard. He's like, I'm starting a religion. And I truly was going to look up how to pronounce this. I was like, important note, look up how to pronounce this. Cut this out. Thelema? Thelema. He's like, I'm starting a religion. It's called Thelema, and I'm going to, proselytize to the world, do what thou wilt, and I'm going to live it. He has a daughter with her, or, she has a daughter with him, which is named, and this is one of the bad things that he did.
Here we go.
The daughter is named Nuit Ma Athatur Hecate Sappho Jezebel Lilith. Mostly going by Lilith.
Crowley.
Raven.
Darkness, dementia, Raven Way. Yeah, Aleister Crowley could have and would have written My Immortal if he was around now. He's like, I'm starting a religion. But also he was really like a jack of all trades. He was like, I'm still publishing poetry, but it's bad. So I'm gonna pay £1,000 to whoever will write the best essay about my poetry. So he got a bunch of people trying, and so it never sold well. He was like, I'm also gonna still try to be a mountaineer. So he's like, I want to climb Kanchenjunga, which is in the Himalayas, the world's most treacherous mountain. And he gets in this big fight with the mountaineers that are going with him, because they're like, you are reckless. You're not climbing this mountain with proper safety protocols, and we're with you, and we don't want to do it this way. And then some of them die in an accident. And
He's a jerk.
The whole mountaineering community is like, fuck you, Aleister Crowley. Mm-hmm. And he is exiled from the first of many communities.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like any community he belongs to will probably end up there.
Right. You got kicked out of being a mountaineer, dude. But
he's like, do what thou wilt. They're like, no, we're climbing a treacherous mountain. Do what they will.
For real.
It's not easy to get deported from Nepal.
Well, he gets deported from several countries. He meets up with Mr. George Cecil Jones, and does some rituals, and he thinks that he has this samadhi, or a union with God, and uses a bunch of hashish, and just a lot of drugs. He's writing more books, the holy books of Thelema. He's like, this is the objective truth. This is what it is. And so he and George Cecil Jones make AA, which is a spiritual successor to the Golden Dawn, is how they like to think of it. It's more like he got kicked out of really being part of the Golden Dawn, so he just made his own similar thing that's basically their ideas and then his own ideas of Thelema. At some point during this, he meets a guy named Victor Newberg, who becomes his partner for a little while. He's still married, but, do what thou wilt. It was also his closest disciple, and they started doing a bunch of sadomasochism. Then
this guy.
I'm not into it.
And then his daughter Lilith dies of typhoid.
No.
And he blames his wife's alcoholism and divorces her.
Do what thou wilt, dude.
No, well, he divorces her. And then he goes to Algeria and does some sex magic on a mountain. He does an evocation to the demon Choronzon using blood sacrifices. I know we're kind of going right on.
You don't want to dwell on the mountaintop blood magic.
Yeah, that happens.
Sacrifices.
And then his old friend Mathers, who remember initiated him against the will of the group, and then they got kicked out kind of together. But Mathers sues him because he's like, you're just using Golden Dawn
suing
stuff.
people for stuff.
They sued us.
I feel
a lot of occult suing.
Yeah, it reminds me of Nexium. They just fucking.
Well, imagine it's like you're a lawyer and it's like, oh, who am I defending today? It's like these fucking occultists are suing each other again. Because Mathers is like, you're just using Golden Dawn stuff in the AA magazine. But Crowley wins that time and gets super famous for it. And now a bunch of people want to joined AA, and they started doing public
Is it
performances.
just the two letters A?
It's just the
like,
letter.
like Alcoholics Anonymous?
Not exactly Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is what it's. That's just the name. It's A.A.
Okay.
And it doesn't stand, I don't think, for anything. Truly, like, it doesn't stand for anything, as far as I know. And I'm looking at it right now.
Huh.
Yeah, weird.
Yep. It maybe stands for Argentium Astrum, which means silver star, but they were like, that's not necessarily actually what it is. A lot of people were like guessing what it could stand for.
Right. Okay.
All these clubs have their secrets, and that's probably you have to get high level in the club to be.
It's just why they keep saying A. He started AA, and I'm like, wow.
Well, he finally now is.
He got himself together.
Yeah. Not
his wife though.
Oh well. He's finally kind of picking up traction. Like, now he's actually getting famous. People want to join his religion finally. They start doing these public performances of magic where everyone who comes, like, drinks peyote, and they're like, oh my god, you're doing magic. The rites of Artemis. And he was really into being perceived as a Satanist, or like, I do human sacrifice, but he actually didn't worship Satan, and he never did human sacrifice. He was just really into the image, this sort of, to use a quote from Gillian Tyndall's A Handbook on Witches, he was into the romantic concept of diabolism, but wasn't actually into worshiping Satan.
Yeah. The sexy concept of it, but not the real concept of it.
So he's really gaining traction in occult circles now because he won that court case against the Golden Dawn. So he joins another order. He's the Templi Orientis. He's appointed the head of the whole British branch. He's called the Mysteria Mystica Maxima, and he calls himself Baphomet.
Sure, 3M.
Yeah, 3M, Triple M.
What if 3M?
He decides, he's like, oh, I just joined your group and you immediately promoted me. Great, we're doing Thelema here now. Also, we're doing sex magic, but only 11th level members get to do.
I thought you were going to say, we only do 11th level sex magic.
Well, it is like a lot of like anal sex magic that he's like, you only get to do if you're very high level. So,
and he gets to choose who's high level,
probably.
I guess.
He's still really into Victor Newberg, and they go together to Paris. See, this is just a crazy, everything that happens. I'm like, I can't really leave any of this out because it's all batshit crazy. They go to Paris to do something called Paris Working, which, you know, Paris Working or Working Paris. He does 6 weeks of drugs and sex magic with each other and a journalist.
Wow.
But then after that, Victor Newberg is like, I'm not really into you anymore. And so Crowley curses him.
Oh,
I don't know what the curse is, but he's like, I curse you. I'm an occultist and I'm cursing you because you're breaking up with me. What a drama queen. And then,
very much,
you know, he just did this whole like crazy vacation, and now
6
he's out
weeks
of money.
Drug vacation.
Now he's like, great, I have no money now. So AA and TO, I'm the head of your groups. Please give me donations. That's what he means by being a full-time occultist. He's like, I'm just kind of getting donations from these groups that decide to make me their head. So he's like, I'm going to go to New York. Here's the part where it's a Bond movie, suddenly.
Oh, right.
The First World War...
The what?
You know, the First World War. It starts.
You're having to say so many words. Some of them are going to get messed up.
I'm so excited that I'm talking so fast.
And that's why I called it the Great War, because it's so difficult to say World War One.
Yeah. Well, WWW starts.
www.worldwar1.
I forgot that one doesn't start with it.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Okay, why don't you start over? Not all the way back.
WWO.
So Aleister Crowley's born in...
Oh, no.
So the First World War starts, and Crowley's in New York, and he says to everyone, basically, you know, anyone who asks, I actually have Irish ancestry, so I kind of like hate England because they're not nice to the Irish peoples, so I support Germany in this war.
Oh, nice.
Because I hate England because I'm Irish.
And he always talked with rising terminals.
And so these German like Germany's spy group,
Yeah.
whatever, the Germany spy group
That's hanging out in New York.
Yeah. Actually, yes, employs him and goes, hey, you should write for our propagandist paper to try to make sure the U.S. doesn't get involved in the war, because we don't want the U.S. in this war. So, since you hate England so much, work for us and write for us. But actually, he was not actually he was actually a double agent working for the British intelligence services to specifically undermine the Germany's operation by writing stuff that US people would actually get mad about and that would make Germany look stupid without them knowing. And
that's
which
awesome.
I think is crazy. He just like intentionally did a bad job and would like relate, like make allegories comparing Germany to things that Germany thought were good, but he knew Americans would actually dislike. And so he was actually like employed by the British government. I think that is
wild.
The best thing he ever did in his life.
For sure.
And it's really downhill from there. So once he's done doing that, he decides to get in a throuple with Leah Hersig and Nanette Shumway.
At this point, you're not shocking me.
No, they have kids. It's these two women with kids, and they all move to a villa in Sicily and just start like a commune. And they're like, we just wear robes now, and we do rituals to Ra. But this is actually
once you
what's
get
the
a certain
most
age, robes
upsetting
just
to me.
feel good.
Yeah,
They
but this
do.
part
It's
is
like
very
muumuus.
upsetting. They move to this villa, and there's kids with them there, but it starts getting really addicted to heroin. So he's just on heroin all the time.
That's
the kids
not
are
good.
there watching them do sex magic,
No, I
which
don't
is
like
just
that.
having sex in front of their kids.
I don't like that
there
at
are
all.
wild dogs and cats wandering everywhere. Everything is dirty. Nobody's cleaning up because they're saying, do what thou wilt. And they're like, well, none of us want to clean. So it's just
Right.
disgusting. And there's kids growing
I
up in
hate
there.
this story too.
This is where I started to get really like
I'm not
upset
into
with
it anymore.
It's like Bond movie, and now it's like Nexium.
I don't like it.
But so they
It's more
they
like
had
Grey
some.
Gardens.
Hey,
There's-
I like them.
There's this guy.
They weren't doing drugs.
They. I don't know what they were doing.
They were just dealing with mental illness.
It's true.
They weren't having sex in front of their children.
No. This
But they did
is
have
the
raccoons.
worst part is that there's this guy who came here with his wife. Her name is Betty May, and she got out to tell the story. So she reported on some things that happened there in this weird like villa magic commune, which one member was made to drink the blood of a sacrificed cat.
Ooh, gross. Ooh.
The
Also,
I
don't
know,
sacrifice
like, trigger
cats.
warning or something. They had to cut themselves with razors every time they said the pronoun I.
Yeah, this is going off the fucking rails.
They all were drinking from a local polluted stream, and so Betty May's husband dies of a liver infection from just drinking. So she
This
gets
is making
the
me feel
fuck
like
out of
Darwinism,
it.
you
Like,
know?
horrible. She yeah, maybe at a certain point, if you have snow blindness and malaria and you're just
And then you're just
drinking-
on
you
heroin
still
drinking.
think it's a good idea to drink surface water.
Well, so she gets out and she tells the press, and she's the one who calls him the wickedest man in the world, which now has like a darker sense for me, because it's like, imagine like going through it, seeing your husband do all that, and like seeing that happen with like kids around, and that's when Benito Mussolini kicks him out of Italy.
Good idea.
Which, like, yeah,
Good idea.
like,
That was a good
choice,
Yeah,
Mussolini.
yeah, get them out.
He gets next deported from France because he was having a lot of experimentations in sex magic. He was on heroin. He was on cocaine. He was just like doing this shit.
Yeah.
Gets deported from France, which like
Like, that's the one that's the
debauched
most-
do you have to be to get deported from France?
Yeah.
He fakes his own death, but not for
As you
very
do.
long. He's going to have this art exhibit because he decides he's an artist, right? Opening in Berlin. And so 3 weeks before it, he fakes his own death at the Bocca di Inferno rock formation. And then he just reappears at the opening of his art exhibit. He's like, I'm alive!
Pulling a Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, for real. He sues a bunch of people who he says libeled him, and it cost him like a ton of money, and he won some
They're
of
like,
them,
"I'm
but not
sorry, you
all
were
of
dead."
them. Right. And so then World War II is ramping up, and he is like, Hitler might be cool. He seems like the kind of guy that would maybe get in on Thelema. but then Hitler
Hitler
abolishes.
allies with Mussolini.
Well, but
And
Hitler
doesn't like magic.
Hitler in Germany abolishes the German chapter of the OTO, which is the one that he's like the Triple M leader of in England. And so Crowley is like, actually, I hate you. You're a black magician. You know, you should go die. And he tries to help the war effort, but England is like, we don't actually want you. Like, you've been a while and you're too much for us now. He wrote some books to try to help. He was like very anti-Hitler, so that's good. There's a legend that I don't know if it's substantiated or not, that he went to Winston Churchill and said, like, I have magic that can help you win the war, and Churchill refused him. But he ended up, I mean, just a lot of illnesses. He had asthma, and Germany was what was producing the medicine to help with his asthma, so he could no longer get it.
Oh, no.
And so in 1947, Aleister Crowley dies of chronic bronchitis aggravated by pleurisy and myocardial degeneration. I think he had a lot of illnesses from his lifestyle. But he had a small funeral, but they read from the Gnostic Mass, which was labeled as a black mass by the tabloids, which is like a parody of Christian rites, where, you know, it's
you do like an upside down cross,
right? Yeah.
You take the communion wafer out of your mouth. No, that's
and
spit out wine.
According to one of my references, just to tie it all back together, I did not see this in a ton of places, but according to the Occult Chambers Compact Reference book, Crowley did at some point say that he was a vampire. So ties it all together. Occultism. I mean, he did like drink cat blood and shit, so I think he did enough bad things.
Well, he's like one of the most famous occultists, and it ties it into the themes of Nosferatu.
And I mean, what a life. I mean,
it's quite a life.
Kicked out of Italy, kicked out of France, kicked out of, you know, working for the English intelligence services, kicked out of mountaineering.
Maybe there's such a thing as like too much life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bisexual, you know, erstwhile occultist, but I really more of an occult scholar.
Yeah.
I really don't claim him as like a cool guy. I mean, maybe if his parents hadn't been I don't know, this weird exclusive brethren fundamentalists, maybe it was all a reaction to his youth, or maybe he just had a lot of issues.
I mean, he is definitely an interesting character.
For sure.
Oh,
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Well, that is my story.
Thank you. I'll bring it back into my story. Is my guy, Alban Grau, after Nosferatu, he went to this conference, and he was like one of the masters in his group, Pan Sophia, and the leader of Pan Sophia did not like Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley shows up.
Who does?
He shows up and he's like, you should all be into Thelema. And
as he did.
And I think his name was Tanker, but I could be wrong, so I'm just going to say the leader of Pan Sophia was like, no, we're not going to. And it broke up their whole group, the Pan Sophia group, and some of them followed Aleister Crowley and Thelema, and some of them started a new group. And Alban Grau was like, I'm not joining you, Aleister Crowley.
Probably for the best.
And then Hitler was like, I'm kicking your whole group out. And so Alban Grau went to Switzerland until after the Nazis, and then he came back to Germany.
It's all there. I think this and our last episode about the Ghostbusters stuff even are very connected, and connect back to the Frankenstein because
definitely.
This is, you know, a lot of Paula Dory wrote the first vampire thing. It was based on Lord Byron. Crowley loved Shelley. There's a lot of the romantics are really wrapped up in, because it's this whole kind
in the
of
gothic horror.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that was great. And now the movie Nosferatu, do you guys recommend?
Oh, absolutely. And I also recommend the Werner Herzog version.
I need to see that.
I really did feel like you saw it, but I guess where were you? It doesn't make sense.
Was it really boring and maybe I slept through it?
Maybe.
No, it was I mean, I don't know. I don't think it was
I
boring.
didn't find it boring, but you do fall asleep very easily.
He does.
I do. It's one of my talents.
So, Zoe, are you going to have a song for us?
I am. I have a little song about how it's sad and hard to be a vampire, and they just want love.
They just need a hug.
Yeah, I would.
And some
I
blood.
would hug Count Orlok so hard.
I would hug that baby.
What a baby.
Also,
Little rat baby.
if you are a fan of the great classic show SpongeBob,
Buffy
there's an episode with Nosferatu in it.
Oh, that's right.
The hash-slinging slasher, you
Yeah,
mean?
he's flicking the lights
It literally
Oh,
has Nosferatu.
Nosferatu.
So, if you don't want to watch the film, you can just watch that episode of SpongeBob. But you should watch the film.
In lieu of the film.
Like Film Fam, inspired by true events, subscribe to hear more stories that inspired our favorite films.
For photos and links from the show and other shenanigans, follow us on Instagram at FilmFamPodcast, on Twitter at FilmFam_podcast, or on Facebook at FilmFam Inspired by True Events.
If you have any questions, comments, corrections, or films whose inspiration you'd like us to explore, you can email us at filmfampodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you all for listening. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Heartbeat all around, haven't felt that vibe in a long while. Part heat, mostly sound, everybody's gotta dance with a big smile, feeling brittle in the middle of a crowded place. I'm looking for a little patch of quiet. Loud buzz, feel the love, all these people got me wishing I could die twice. Evil is what evil does, so I'm not unlike, isn't that nice? Such a liar, say I'm tired when I just need space, looking for a little patch of quiet. And then there's you, soft behind closed doors. We're so hungry, wanting more, so hungry, wanting more. It's always you. If you say you won't leave, then we don't have to breathe. We don't have to breathe. Pinked lips try to blush, haven't tasted blood in a cold year. Things slip, what's the rush? Can't we not live happily here? Feeling rotten and forgotten like a love-lost creep, looking for a little spot of stillness. Plagued minds went to bed, can't help thinking that I came back wrong. Day finds all my friends, they hang out and I stumble along. Such a liar, say I'm tired when I never sleep, looking for a little spot of stillness. And then there's you, soft behind closed doors. We're so hungry, wanting more, so hungry, wanting more. It's always you. If you say you won't leave, then we don't have to breathe. We don't have to breathe. Lights low, silhouetted, walking slowly. Now do they regret it? So unholy. Canary in the coal mine, baby. Scary, but there's no time lately. There's no fun in safety. They got no time lately. And then there's you, all that I dream of. We're so hungry, wanting love, so hungry, wanting love. It's only you, help me to survive. Then we're the ones alive. Are we the ones alive? And then there's you, soft behind closed doors. We're so hungry, wanting more, so hungry, wanting more. It's always you. If you say you won't leave, then we don't have to breathe. we don't have to breathe.